during the pandemic, I think one of the hardest things that everyone has had to deal with is the mental health issues, right? The depression, the wanting to be somewhere else, right? The wanting to do something else, the wanting to be with somebody else, and all that.
When we are confronted with isolation, we either fight or we flight, because we don't realize that isolation is actually a conflict. We think of conflict being something that someone comes at us with a weapon or something else, but the reality is, in our minds, isolation is a sometimes deadly conflict in which we've got to be able to deal. So we're either going to flight, we're going to move away from it, or we're going to fight it, and fight it not necessarily in a negative way. We want to have the right kind of tools.
The sense of community is so needed. Humans are not meant to be alone. Even if you're the largest introvert, social interaction is still important, because it gives you that comfort that you're not in it by yourself. There's others who do understand and that want to help you.
As a college professor, there have been a lot of requests during the pandemic for accommodations, right? People asking for special consideration because of difficulties they're having. And in some cases, of course, this is because they've been ill. But in a lot of cases, it's simply because they've been overwhelmed by situations. The Black Lives Matter protests, that was big where I am in Louisville, Kentucky. And so that was happening just right alongside the pandemic beginning. And so a lot of people also found themselves asking for accommodations because of that, because they were exhausted because of issues surrounding that. And of course, one of the conversations that's been coming up a lot is, what do you do with the vulnerable? And who are the vulnerable?
I think the advantage of COVID, if there can be some advantages of COVID, as you mentioned, is that it opened the door for us to have that conversation about that. I think in the past, there's been a fear that if you talk about suicide, that students will think about committing suicide, and that's just not the case. Students don't think, well, I haven't been thinking about suicide, but now that you mention it, let me commit. That's not a thing. But our fear is that if we talk about that openly or have that conversation about it, that will get a student to think about harming themselves, and that's not the case. Rather, what it does, it creates a student who is thinking about that to know there's somebody who cares for me, and I have an outlet. I can process that with people and do that.